Thank you so much, Nika. Um, Thanks everyone for being here tonight and helping me celebrate Susie and White Ivy, which has sort of taken the book world by storm. White Ivy is, I feel like it's like one of the most talked about books of this moment, and it recently hit the New York Times bestseller list, which is like so incredible. I guess I wanted to first start out by talking about how Susie and I know each other because I think that it is a relationship that goes deeper than most writer friendships do. We've actually known each other since we were
In college.
in
I think,
college, but we knew
yeah,
of each other for
yeah.
much longer. So I was childhood family friends with her partner, Alex, and who she's been dating since she was 16 and is now
Yeah.
married to. So we've had a connection for a really long time, and we've always bonded over books. So it's sort of a dream to get to be together here at, or virtually here at Books for Magic, to talk about her first book and her life as a writer and how she got to this moment. So Susie, you have a really non-traditional, incredible kind of background when it comes to how you came to be a writer. So do you want to start just by telling everyone how you got here?
Yes, because you were actually a really big part of that. so, um, okay, so after school, when we were deciding where to go for college, I got into a pharmacy program at Rutgers, and unlike most like undergrad and graduate programs where it's 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of grad school, the program here was 6 years. So essentially I was committing to becoming a pharmacist straight from high school, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. A few years in, I realized I was not cut out to be a pharmacist. It was too late at that point. I thought it was too late at that point to drop out because I'd already invested so much time into taking these very technical classes that wouldn't translate to another major. So I got my degree and then immediately moved out to San Francisco to work in tech, which, is still another normal career path that I thought, would be secure and make my parents very happy. So I did that for 4 years. I was out there and kind of moving all around the US pursuing startup opportunities. And then what happened was, I call it my quarter life crisis. And the reason why I say you're a part of that, as I've told you so many times, because I still remember the moment you were like, oh, I'm going to, because we had always been visiting each other and keeping in touch. And I remember you were like working, I think you were in Shanghai at the time, and you were probably gathering material for your first novel. And we were, talking about what we wanted to be. And you said, oh, I'm going to start applying for MFA programs. And I was like, what's that? Like, what does that mean? And you were explaining to me, you get a degree and you can, study creative writing. And I thought, that's like a thing that you can do. And then I was like, are you, how much is tuition? And you were like, they pay you to do this. And I thought, oh my God, America's a great place, So that was the first concept I had. Like, you were the only person I knew who was pursuing something in the creative field. And I think I came to visit you in your program in Wisconsin around graduation, I think. Maybe, yeah, I think
Yeah, you actually came to visit a couple times. I think once was around graduation, once was my second year. And I remember at the time, I was in my program and I was trying to get an agent, and my novel was out in submission. I remember you being there when I think I was like on the phone with Age. I just remember you being kind of a big part of it, but you were in San Francisco at the time, right?
Yeah, I was living in San Francisco, working on Base Rails, which was a startup, and kind of living vicariously through you. I'd read your novel and you were querying and taking phone calls, and I thought, this is so cool. And that was the first time I thought, oh, maybe I can do this. And I remember you were like, show me your work, Susie, send me your work. And I was like, no. I was like, I can't, because I never show anyone my work. I'm so secret about it. And you're like, just send me anything, like anything. So I think I ended up sending you random first chapters. I have 3 different stories I had, written and given up on. And you had given me such encouraging advice. You said, you said this is very cinematic, or something along the lines of, it was very, like, the world was very interesting. Essentially I thought, okay, maybe if Lucy tells me I have talent, I can keep on going. And that was really early on. So then back to how I became a writer. So essentially that all these things kind of gelled in my mind, and I thought, let me give myself a year to see if I can make it as as a writer to write a book. And if I can't do that, then probably I'm not cut out to ever finish a novel. And then I spent the year doing that, and that's what became White Ivy. It's a very long-winded answer, yeah.
I think what's so refreshing about your attitude toward this is that you recognize that writing is 90% hard work. The talent has to be there, but I think the fact that I think a lot of people who try to go to MFA programs have this idea in their mind, if I can get into a program, if someone tells me that I'm worth it, that I'm good enough, I'll be able to write a novel. And that is almost never the case, because I think that what it actually takes is for you to make that commitment yourself and to put in the work. And I think that you very early on recognized that that was going to be the hard part. And you were like, well, I can actually just do that. And you were really, I think, resourceful too. You sought out classes sort of in the area, and I remember you were studying books. Like I remember seeing Gone with the Wind on your desk, and it was just marked up because Susie would go through it and just like study plot. How does the author, make the chapters move? And I thought that was such a great approach, such a technical approach. But of course, the inspiration, the creativity has to be behind it. And it was really interesting to see you fashion this kind of self-education for yourself. And meanwhile, I was kind of going the alternative path, and I was getting an MFA, and so the two of us doing that alongside each other was really interesting, I think.
Yeah, we're pretty different. I feel like both our personalities and probably the way our minds work, because I think the classes and even just our periodic conversations was what got me through. Like I feel like I'm the sort of person, I'm mostly internally motivated, but every once in a while I feel like, oh, like somebody tell me something, and I remember you gave me that advice where you said do whatever it takes just to finish the book. Like it doesn't matter. Like I was, because I think I was asking you, how should I do this, or how did you write? And you said, doesn't matter. Like if you need to lie to yourself, if you need to like just, pretend like what you're doing is so important, whatever it is, the most important thing is to just get to the end. And that really helped, because every time I would start doubting, is this worth doing? Is this any good? I would think it doesn't matter. I just need to finish. And that, I think that's how I kept up the pacing to finish the book. But
yeah, I mean, I definitely still stand by that. I think that our vocation is such a weird one, in that in a way no one else's opinion matters until you finish the book. You only have yourself, and I think the biggest battle is to just get out of your own way. And I knew that you had the talent, so I think for you it definitely was a matter of just getting it done. Because I think you also the one thing that you struggled with was that it was difficult for you to finish something, right? So you would start a million because you were inspired, but then the follow through of the writing it is like where the struggle was. So tell us what happened from that point. So you were in San Francisco, and you were writing. You're trying to write a novel, and what happened between then and now? Like, where did that what was the moment that this book kind of took off for you?
I think the book took off for me at the 40,000 word mark, because that was, for some reason, I use this app called Ulysses, which I told you about. It essentially tracks, it's like a Scrivener. It tracks, all your work, and you can put in files. And so I remember being so diligent, because my problem was finishing. I thought, if I can make it, I just gave myself, I said, if I can make it to 40K, that's too many words to throw away. Like, even for me, I cannot possibly throw that many words away. So I just would write. And once I got to that point, I was like, oh my God, this is a work in progress, right? Like I can see the finish line, that kind of feeling. And that was a big turning point, because that was the first moment that I knew I could finish. And that was like a huge feeling. And then I finished it within the year, which was my goal. And after that, so you mentioned I'd gone to conferences and things like that. So yeah, in San Francisco, I took a workshop with Glenn David Gold at the Grotto. And he had mentioned a conference I should apply to called Tin House. So I was Googling this, and I think actually you and I tried to go together some summer, but our timing didn't work out. We wanted to coordinate. Which
it's
conference?
Always been our dream to do some kind of residency together. We'll make it happen.
So I ended up going on my own, and then that was where I met my agent. She sat next to me at lunch at Tin House, and she said, what are you working on? And I pitched it to her as an Asian American Edith Wharton book, and she told me to email it to her when I finished it, and that was in July. And at that point, it was, like 9 months into my year of writing. And so I thought, oh my God, like I have an agent, potentially waiting for me. I had to tell myself that she was waiting for me, right? to convince myself to finish the book. So I finished it in October and I sent it to her. And then she read it in a day and she got back to me and, gave me the offer of representation. And then we sold it to Simon and Schuster that December. And you were there for that too. So we were living in New York at the time, and we were both of us were living in the Upper East Side.
I think we kind of just like skated over the fact that she read it in 24 hours. Just wanted to call attention to that. But yeah, no, that is not a normal response to a novel. And I think that was one of the moments that we kind of realized, like, this is going to be really big. At least we hoped. Nobody can ever count on it. But I probably should have asked you to do this in the beginning when we started, but do you want to take a moment here just to tell people who might not know what White Ivy is about?
Yeah, sure. I've been going around saying, hello, my name is White Ivy, because I say it so many times. So White Ivy, it follows the story of Ivy Lin, who is a Chinese American girl from when she's 14 to 27. And as a child, she falls in love with this golden boy at her very prestigious school named Gideon Speyer. And as adults, they reconnect. And the entire arc of the story is essentially watching Ivy kind of scheme and lie and try to insert herself into this world of very like New England wealth and, waspy culture. And I think the pleasure for me of writing the book was to kind of explore also, like, why is Ivy so determined to belong to this world? What are the circumstances of her background in her life that make her want this privilege so bad? And also, how far is she willing to go to get it? So I feel like the best way I can describe it is sort of, it starts off very coming of age and it picks up, toward the end to, I guess, to become a little bit more of a thriller. So kind of that, the two mesh of the two genres.
I think one of the things that I find really interesting about your writing is that you have such respect for the reader and the reader's attention. Like, I remember your greatest fear as you're writing, you were like, is it boring? Is it boring? And I think that did, wonders for the book, because your book is never boring. Every page is sort of astounding. So I kind of want to lead that into a conversation about process. How do you see the writing process, right? Because I think often when writers talk about process, it's a lot of writers who have come through the MFA program, and I hear kind of the same thing over and over again. So I'm curious how you would describe it.
Oh, wow. My process? I would say my process is...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say to me, it's like throw things at the wall and see what works. Like, I'm not precious about words, as you know. So I think in one day, if I'm really in flow, I can write a lot of words. That's never been, like, I've never had a fear of the blank page, as I've heard some writers articulate, which is, the page is scary. Like, to me, it's never felt scary. And I think I attribute that to really, we talked about this, just to journaling and writing so many stories growing up. So to me, it's reflex to go to the page and write how I feel and what happened as a comfort. So to me, just typing, writing it feels just like I'm expressing myself, and it feels like, it feels very therapeutic. So I've never been afraid of that. But I think my problem is trying to assimilate everything that I want to say into the most cohesive story. So yeah, my process is just, I have this image in mind, I have a scene, I have a premise, and then I write the scene, and then I look for moments of tension. I ask myself, would this scene be interesting to me as a reader? And if that part is true, then I would think, what happens next and why? But I think we talked about this, the inspiration for, like, why we even write a book and what compels us is really different for two of us. Because for me, it's the vision of the book as a whole. I write to get to the end. I write because I have this thing in my mind, and it's very perfect for me. in my imagination, it's very perfect. It's my execution of it that's very flawed. But I'm really motivated to bring that vision onto the page and express something. And I think for you, it's really to discover. You write to explore a topic or to discover something that you want to say that you're not necessarily sure about in the beginning. Is that correct?
Yeah. For me, I also kind of start with a moment of tension and characters, but the joy of writing is discovery. So I almost write like a reader. I discover things as I go. And then it isn't until I'm in a very late draft where I realize, oh, this is the thing that I'm trying to do. And I think it's a much more specific thing than it could have been if I had started out with that idea. So
Yeah.
the idea of having a vision from the beginning feels a little bit stymied to me.
Mm.
But also when I talk about vision, I'm talking about theme. I'm talking about like, I don't know what a character discovers herself in the course about herself in the course of a novel. So I'm not sure if you're talking about vision in quite the same way.
Mm.
When you say vision, are you thinking about those things, or are you thinking about things like plot, things like structure?
Um, both, like both plot, but also themes. Like the theme is what compels me to even want to express something. I actually think maybe we end up in the same place, but start out from a different place. Do you know what I mean? So for me, like I sort of have the opposite problem where, you know, I have like the plot and the structure, and I think, okay, A, B, C, D is going to happen. But as I'm writing, it doesn't go that way. You know, it's not like, oh yes, this went perfectly according to my master plan. Like it's always, it gets sidetracked and I'm like, oh, but this character, you know, they're so boring now, or, you know, that part wasn't interesting. So in that way, I'm still listening to what's happening in the moment, even though I'm constantly trying to get it back, you know, onto the bigger thing that I want to say. So yeah, it's still the struggle, I think, between the vision, to me, the vision and the execution of the
Yeah.
book.
I mean, maybe in that way, vision to us is kind of the lie we have to tell ourselves to keep going, as we were talking about a
Yeah.
few minutes ago, right? Because
Yeah.
you're right. When things land on the page, it becomes its own thing. It has its own kind of alchemy, and you have to just kind of listen to it. I think it becomes really apparent on second and third
Mhm.
reads after we put it away for a while and looked at these
Yeah.
drafts again when we're not listening to the book. And I think it's apparent to our friends and our agents too, whenever that happens.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the other thing I wanted to kind of talk about was one thing that I find amazing about how you write is your ability to focus. This woman can focus for like 8 hours at a time. I don't know anyone who writes for such long stretches of time, but it's it's amazing to watch. Do you feel like you need that the kind of recuperation, like recuperation that's sort of balanced by focus, or do you feel like you can just power through drafts until they're done?
It comes back to, I think, my personality. Like I'm such an extreme person, as you know. Like I have no self-control. And I always say this, like I'm quite a lazy person. And you know what I mean. But I think people are like, oh no, you're not lazy, you're so industrious. But no, I think I'm quite lazy. But the problem is, but the thing is, you know, I'm lazy, but I also am like a finish. Like I really want to get something done. Like I'm so impatient, you know, if something is unfinished that I really want to do, like nobody can make me do something I don't want to do, but if I want to do something, like I have to finish like ASAP. It's like the instant gratification in me. So I think I rush, you know, we've talked about this too, which is like, I wish I could learn to take my time because I think that produces better work, you know, but I can't seem to do that. And I think the 8 hours of writing is a symptom of that personality trait in me where, you know, if I'm in the middle of a chapter, it's really hard for me to stop. So I work that long and my chapters tend to be a certain length, like, you know, maybe 5,000 words or, you know what I mean? In that like 3,000 to 5,000 word range, because that's how long I can write in one sitting. You know what I mean? So like I can
I love
start,
that.
like I start and like, this is what I'm going to work on today. And then that becomes a chapter and that takes me, sometimes I can work, you know, 16 hours because I'm not done the chapter. And so that, I think that's even just how I structure my book unconsciously. But you know, you make it sound like I work like that all the time. Like I can probably do that for 3 months and then I have to take like 1 month off where I do nothing and I just, you know, Netflix all day and travel and we'll go on trips together. So I'm extreme in that way. I'm not balanced. Unlike you. Who
I
write
I do
4 hours
have a
a
more
day.
balance.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. I get a set amount of inspiration in a day slash time I can be sitting still, and if I don't use it, I lose it. So I write a few hours a day, and then I put it aside and I work on it the next day. So I'm like, yes, I have a really different process. And I think that there are pros and cons to both, right? Because like you said, of course it's not good to rush. Um, but there is something to be said about the ability to live within a world and a moment for
Mm,
long stretches of time. So you really kind of go underwater and you never leave
mm,
until it's done. And there is some kind of quality that I think stays there in that space and sort of grows. So So yeah, I think keep doing whatever is working
Do,
for you.
do you have that moment where, after you work, let's say you do your writing session where you have no idea like what's going on around you, and someone's talking to you, but it like takes you a while, right? Do you have that feeling? You know what I mean? If somebody is like,
Yeah, yeah,
Lucy, like,
yeah.
yeah, I feel that these days I'm
Who
becoming
are you?
worse.
What is this thing that is a face?
Yeah,
Yes.
like I'm becoming worse. Like in the beginning, it used to be not that bad. Now sometimes it takes me like an hour, and people will be saying things to me, but I can't hear them. Like I just look through. Like Alex has gotten used to it. He's always like, "Oh, I know when you're in that mood. You see through me." And then he like took a photo of me once. I look frightening. Like my mouth is just like hanging open, and I'm just like looking at him like I'm a zombie. Yeah, I'm getting worse at that these days. I feel
I
like
generally feel like for me, it's like you you finish working, but you're just like standing in front of an open microwave eating something for like a very long time. You don't sit down, you're just eating something out of a bowl. And yeah, the
yeah,
rest of the day is a little bit hazy. I've had that feeling too, but probably
yeah.
not as strongly as you have.
It's a good thing that you don't.
So you mentioned travel. You do a lot of traveling. In fact, right now you're in Istanbul.
Yes.
Um, I'm wondering how that factors into your writing. So in White Ivy, China is one of the settings
Mhm.
for the novel. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I think at the literal level, the traveling just affects where I set my books. So even in White Ivy, it's set in so many different places. She grows up in the suburbs of Massachusetts, and then her family moves to New Jersey, and then she goes back to China, like you mentioned, and then she, as an adult, she lives in Boston. So the feeling of going to different places and having that affect your psyche and your mood, that's really familiar to me. So when I was writing White Ivy and I was kind of thinking about the parts, it made sense that the parts would be set in different locations, because those in my mind become benchmarks for periods of my life. Like that period I lived in New York, that period I lived in San Francisco, the period I lived in China or Thailand, etc. And then on a more just, I don't know, like theme level, I think it just affects my writing because of the outsider perspective. So, even growing up, like because I moved around a lot, I was always really used to being the new girl. So that perspective of sort of taking stock of a group of people, or you go to a party where you don't know anybody, or you're on your first day of school, and it's like, where do I sit for lunch? Like things like that interest me so much as a reader because they're reflections of my experience. So those are just themes that crop up in White Ivy, and I find that even as I'm writing the second book, those are still the things that I'm really interested in. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
and you mentioned China. That's so interesting because I'd wanted to talk about that because both of our books have parts set in China. Like your whole book is set in modern day Shanghai, and I remember reading it and thinking it was amazing. Like, do you remember me saying this to you? I had read your book before. Obviously before the ARC, before any of that, you sent it to me. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe that there's a book that is set in China, but like written in English. Like really, it seemed unfathomable to me at the time. It was so shocking. And you had written it from, characters who weren't even our age. Like they were sort of like 40 something, and I was just like, Lucy, like, this is incredible. And I'm so curious about why you felt, the need to, not even the need, but what compelled you to write that. Because for me, when I was writing that China section for Ivy, it was so impulsive. It didn't, I didn't set out to do that in the beginning when I thought of the story of Ivy and Gideon. But to me, I thought, oh, I want to write about the summer. And that came really almost nostalgically for me. Did that feel that way
Mhm.
for you?
It was definitely nostalgic because I spent a couple years in China
Yeah.
and I missed it like hell. And I kind of, it became this kind of, my writing became like a love letter to Shanghai in the years that I lived there. And it started as a short story. So I was writing from the point of view of an IE, so someone who
Yeah.
was a caretaker for the house and who lived in a luxury hotel. And I think very early on started writing about class
Mm-hmm.
without really meaning to, but in a way where it kind of had to be different adults living in the same space, but who came from very different classes. And I think that's why I chose to write from points of view that were very different from mine.
Mm.
But, of course, I took every opportunity to put in every memory that I had of my time spent
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Nostalgia was a huge part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that for like, it's weird. Like I can't write about a place where I'm currently based. You know, it's
Yeah.
so, it's like when I was living in New York, I was like, oh, maybe I should set in New York, but I couldn't. It didn't feel like I had enough distance, you know, to examine that as a separate character. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
The place where you live is so cluttered with practicalities and like, you know, what am I having for lunch today? Clearly, I
Yeah.
struggle with hating myself. Um, but yeah, I think it's so part of the world that is our everyday lives and so separate from the part of it that's art. And
Yeah.
somehow when you're not living there anymore, you can kind of compare it to your current reality and all of the things that were details that were so kind of significant and different about that
Yeah.
place pop out at you easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think in essence, that's probably why I like travel so much. It always feels like something I can go back to later to mine for content.
Yeah. And I totally identify with what you were saying about, you know, being an outsider. I think that
Mm,
there's nothing like travel to make you feel like an
mm,
outsider. And nothing like feeling like an outsider to make you better write about place, I think.
mm,
You know, seeing it from a totally new lens or perspective.
yeah.
So probably should have said this earlier. Maybe Michael has said it in the chat, but if you have any questions for Susie, feel free to drop them in there and I will go ahead and ask her those questions. Um, well, we
There's so
do
many
have a few
comments.
already. So should we just get into it?
Sure. Yeah. I'm just like looking at the chat now. There's so many chats.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just going to go from top to bottom. So we have a question here. We talked earlier about how you pull novels apart to look at how they work. Can you
Mhm.
describe more of that? Explain that more.
Yeah, so to me, whenever I'm stuck, okay, so even before I write, I start by reading. So I'll always pick up a book, and you know, this is also how I circumvent my laziness too, because I'm like, oh, I don't want to write, I'll read because that's fun, and then I read a book, and immediately that inspires me to want to write. So so every time I'm stuck in a part two, I always reach for a book. So and I don't really know how, like, I mean, it's probably in my mind, but it always seems like I always find the right book. So if I'm working on, let's say I'm like working on the scene of Ivy's childhood, right? But I need to condense it into, you know, like more, like using more authorial voice. I would think, oh, what is a great example of that? Of a book I've read that's done that. And then I'll find that book and then I'll, you know, look at that scene and think, did that work for me as a reader? Did it feel rushed to me? What did I love about it? Like, what were the pleasures of it? What is the pacing of it, and then yeah, and then it seems to unlock something in me. So each time I get stuck in writing something, I always reach for a book. And what's even more on an even a more like grammatical level, like this is how completely I don't know, like just unknowledgeable I was. I remember thinking like, when at what point do you write like he said versus you don't leave that on. Do you know what I mean? Like just such silly things that you never think about as a reader because it's
Mm.
unconscious. So I would say that my reading brain is a little bit different than my writing brain when I read a book, and that I'm actually a little bit conscious of that because I don't want to lose the pleasures of my reading brain. Like I'm really scared that if I read too much like a writer, then I'll be too critical, you know, or I'll always be too technical. So I still want to like lose myself in the story. Like when I read a book, I don't think about the words, you know, I'm like imagining what's happening in my mind. And I don't want to lose that. But when I'm writing and I'm looking for an answer to something, I very much will reach for a book. To see an example of great dialogue, or to see an example of like how a lot of people are introduced at once. You know, like if you enter a room and there's lots of people in the room, you know, how do you get how is the reader not confused by that? So I always reach for books in those cases.
So do you feel like, okay, so you said that you don't want to lose that reader sense of
Yeah.
yourself. Do you feel like do you feel that way now? Do you feel transformed? Do you feel like you
Uh,
can't read without looking at it like a writer
luck.
anymore?
No, luckily it's not that bad, but it's not the same. Like it's not, you know, I haven't totally lost it, but it's a little different than before. I would say in the beginning of a book, I read more from like the writer brain, but then later on, you know, when you get lost in the story, it becomes the same. How about you? Have you Do you even
I'm
know the reader brain, or are you
focused
totally writer
on.
brain?
I can't read anything. I've been trying to help Steven, my boyfriend Steven, with like I mean, yeah, cover letters.
Real life talk.
Oh no, I hope he's not watching this. And I can't look at a sentence simply. It has to be like exactly right before. Yeah, I basically don't know how to read like a normal person anymore. Okay, next question. What is one of your best reads of 2020?
Best what of 2020?
Reads of 2020.
Oh, best reads of 2020. To be honest, I really am loving what I'm reading now. Here, I'll just hold it up. I love it. Have you read this? So Lucy and I love Japanese
Okay,
literature.
that's on my list. I have been wanting
Oh,
to read
you'll
that. That's a
love
cool
it.
cover.
This is the UK edition. Oh my God, you're gonna love it. This has been amazing. Like I didn't know, I've seen some people recommend it, but it's so fresh. It's so, when we talked about the losing thing, and like to me, I don't underline that much, but I've underlined like kind of all over this book because she expresses like the physical manifestation of tension with like your family so well. Like the
Mm,
way, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just the things that you would picture, like I'm mad, so you shrug or something, but the way that the characters move as adolescents in this book when they're, physically scared or agitated, it's so realistic and it's really heartbreaking. So I really love this book. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, you're gonna love it.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read the question. I don't have time to pre-read it. I love the book, and being Asian myself, opt to read a lot of novels by authors of Asian descent. I would like if Susie could address the fact that many Asian and Asian American authors write novels with an Asian female protagonist who more often than not end up with a white male character in the end as their love interest. Do you think this white savior mentality is something that Asian authors often lean on, be it a subconscious result or an effort to attract a broader audience?
Yeah, this is a fair question, but to be totally frank, when people ask me, are you Ivy, or like, what is this inspired by? Are you married to a Gideon? And it's like, no, like, my husband is Chinese. But to me, when I was writing the book, I had no idea of what I was trying to represent. There was no secondary motive of, I think this will sell, or this is what the audience wants. I had no idea about an audience. I was writing just to see if I could finish it. And I chose Gideon, who's a white guy, even though I've never dated a white guy, because it feels like it's really appropriate for America. Like Ivy, I wanted her to, do really bad things to get what she wants. But, growing up, when I think about the shows I was watching, the idealized guy is this blonde haired, really kind, somebody who is captain of the soccer team. And so that just naturally became the fitting role for me. And the character of Gideon in this book is not, Ivy idealizes him, but I don't think that, the reader would, from if they read the book, they would not think, oh, the author really wants us to worship this, white male. I don't think that's the case at all. And so to me, it really was to show the flaws actually in how Ivy idealizes him, that she, whatever circumstances made her want this life are flawed and lead her down a dark path that is not, she's not being saved. She's not, she's not saying, oh, this is great, I'm so happy and better off. So it really wasn't, it wasn't a conscious decision. It just felt like if this book took place in a different, different time or different country, the love interest or whatever, idealized form that Ivy would project herself on would be different. It just happened to be that because that was the experience I had growing up. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely didn't end the book thinking Ivy's been saved. That's that's far from where my head was at. Nancy has a question. I loved both of your books and was curious if you would share what you're working on and perhaps when we'll see your next books. Are you ready to talk about your second book?
You talk about it first. You're further along
okay.
than I am.
I am working on a book. Oh man, I didn't think I was gonna have to do this. I'm working on a book about it's kind of a coming of age story. It's three young women who are growing up in Wisconsin in the world of theater. And it's about family, it's about identity, it's about all the things that I think that we're both sort of interested in. And I don't know if I can describe it more than that today. What about
Yeah,
you?
it's really good. I've read the initial version of this so far, and it's amazing. And I can say this because it made me cry a lot when I read it. It really is really personal because it talks about the privilege of making art. I just have to say that because it resonates so much with me now, particularly as a new author, what Lucy is describing in her second book. My book is sort of, it's a love story, and it's set between the US and Beijing, and it deals more with like identity politics. And again, it's sort of the outsider view of looking in. And the world that we're looking into this time is the Chinese entertainment industry. So also something I think which leaves a lot of room for exploring the kind of public persona versus the private self, which are things that I'm interested in.
I didn't actually know that it was about the Chinese entertainment
Yeah, I don't
industry.
think I told you that part. I think I told you about the love story part, but yeah.
Well, very exciting. Okay. I don't think I did these in order. um, Hi, Susie. I so enjoyed White Ivy. Can you explain what the revision process was like for you? As well, do you have any tips on writing a main character that is flawed yet well-rounded? You did such an awesome job with this.
Hmm. I'll answer the second part first. So the flawed and well-rounded, it's because I tend to like books that have those types of characters. And one of my biggest inspirations at the time was Edith Wharton. So I know that, you know, so many people love her, and her popular ones are like Age of Innocence, right? House of Mirth. But the one that really got me was The Custom of the Country. And it stars like her most terrible protagonist. You know, it's this woman named like, and she does everything in her power to gain money, and she uses men, and she ends up getting everything she wants, but she's so miserable, and you kind of get the sense that nothing will ever change for her. And just protagonists like that, even like Scarlett O'Hara, you know, it's just like she doesn't end up with the man she loves. So I think the way to make flawed characters, when I look at those books, I think what made me want to continue rooting for those characters, it was really being with them through every thought process. You know, I feel the pressure that they feel to want more, or to, you know, to portray themselves as better, even though I would never want those things. But because I know how badly they want those things, I feel that for them, because, you know, we're humans and we're pathetic people. So I would say for flawed characters, the interior voice, and really crafting the reasons behind why they want something is really important, because if the audience doesn't know why they want that, then they become like a sociopath, right? Then you feel like, I don't really know what you're doing. You're crazy.
Right. Oh, your husband has a question for us.
Oh
Would
my
the
God.
two of you ever consider writing a novel together? I would like to point out that he's labeled himself in the chat as Susie's husband.
He said he would troll us because he never gets to join these events. Let's move on.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. I remember you talking about how your first draft was a bear, and through edits, it became a deer. This is from your agent, by the way.
God.
I'm really good at picking these. Do you want to talk about how you were able, in a specific craft way, to do that?
Okay, yeah. So to me, I think about it like in scene versus authorial voice. I don't know if this is the correct way to think about it, but to me at least, that's how I visualized it. So I would, especially for Ivy's childhood parts, I had a lot of scenes of her stealing with Rue. I had a lot of shoplifting scenes, so a lot more backstory. And I remember my agent thinking, you know, that this is kind of dragging out. It's not moving the story forward. So how do I get to the core of what needs to be said? And to me, I thought, okay, then I can't write this in scene. You know, to me, that meant dialogue, that meant, you know, what is happening in present almost. And then moving that and using my authorial voice to almost summarize like what's happening over a long period of time. So I don't know if I'm explaining it accurately. I don't have like the vocabulary, but the way I would think about it is that, so, you know, taking 5 different scenes and pulling out what Ivy learned from that and how it affected her, and almost using my narrative voice, not necessarily Ivy's like thoughts in moving the story along. And that kept up. I think a lot of people say this book is, you know, really propulsive, but I think a lot of that is attributed to the authorial voice, like moving the story along and telling you this is important to Ivy's development because of these reasons, and then, you know, having the story move forward in that way.
That's really interesting. I think that, yeah, the authorial voice is, I think, the hardest thing to master, right? And it's the thing that kind of is intimidating to me about having an omniscient narration.
Yeah,
But I think you do it really well.
thank you.
Um, what was your inspiration for White Ivy?
I, I mean, it was really when I thought, okay, let me try to write the book. It was what kind of book? And I knew that I wanted to write the antihero. So, there's so many bad guys on TV and they just do all kinds of terrible things, but it's funny, like, when you watch Game of Thrones, that was like a huge part of our culture growing up, right? And then you watch these people scheme and lie, or you watch Breaking Bad, and it's essentially following one man's, demise and power hunger and House of Cards. So I'm really influenced by that kind of thing because I feel like it's interesting. People who want things are active heroes, right? They like people who don't want anything, they're really passive, right? They just sit at home and it's like happy. So I thought, let me create an anti-hero who really wants something very badly and wants to be a social climber. And it was really natural to fuse that with the Asian American background because that's my background and that's how Ivy Lin was born.
For Lucy, what did you like about Shanghai that prompted you to set your stories in it? And for both Lucy and Susie, how did traveling or living in China affect how you see yourself and the world? And how do you portray its cultural image in your books? Ooh, that seems like, I think this might be the last question because we are at 4:45 now, unless Books or Magic tells us we should keep going. But okay, so for the first question, what did I like about Shanghai that prompted me to set my stories in it? It didn't feel like I liked it. It just it felt like I missed it. It felt like, um, you know what? It also felt like when I was living there, I thought this place in this time right now with all of the changes happening in Shanghai, um, someone needs to write about it. And I wasn't confident enough then to think that somebody might be me. And it wasn't until I went to my MFA program and I started turning in stories about Shanghai that my professor said, you are the one that needs to write about it. And I was like, oh, can I though? And she was like, you have to. So then I did. Um, yeah, but Susie, how did traveling or living in China affect how you see yourself in the world and how you portray its cultural image?
Um, I don't. It's both. I didn't understand. Chinese American, I think, is its own identity in the way that we understand each other. So it doesn't even feel like, oh, I'm looking at America or looking at China from some high up lens where I'm comparing the two. It feels like actually a very unique subset. Like in China too, we're such outsiders. We've talked about this as well. And I think writing about both countries and both culture, and there's such a unique cultural set of, oh, I think we're gonna cut off. Oh, okay. And there's such a unique cultural set of like what we consider, Chinese American parenting or how we understand class or, kind of even spending time because your parents are in Shanghai now. And Alex is my husband, his parents moved back to Shanghai as well. And so both of us have that, sense of trying to fuse the two. And I think what comes off in our work is probably that specific intersection of being Western, but also having kind of Asian values and understanding where our parents are coming from. That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just add that I never feel more American than I am when I'm in China, and I never feel more
Yeah.
Chinese when I'm in America. And it is those feeling like going back to what we were saying before about feeling like an outsider, giving us material to write about.
Yeah.
And I think writing as a vocation, the space to kind of consider these issues and the people who live in these places who might also feel like outsiders.
I just realized, Lucy, we talk really fast.
Oh,
That's fine.
oops, too late.